She lay motionless while the valley breathed around her, and one quiet question pressed against her chest harder than the rifle ever could. What if they were right about her? Fog slid through the Afghan mountains like something alive, curling around stone and shadow, swallowing distance and certainty. Elena Petrova had learned not to fight moments like this. She let them pass through her. Her body was flat against the rock, her cheek resting against the stock, her breathing slow enough to disappear. Below her, far beyond what most men would even consider a shooting distance, a SEAL team moved through a compound that intelligence had promised would be simple. Intelligence lied more often than people admitted. The radio in her ear crackled, calm voices turning sharp, commands shortening, gunfire echoing upward like a warning. Elena didn't move. She watched. She listened. She calculated without numbers, without effort, the way a heartbeat knows when to slow. She hadn't always been here, above the fight, trusted with distance, trusted with time. Once she'd been the one kneeling in the dirt, hands slick with blood that wouldn't stop flowing, begging a body to stay alive long enough for help to arrive. Once, she'd watched a man die because someone, somewhere, couldn't make a shot they needed to make. And when he'd gone still, she'd felt something break that never healed properly again. The voice in her ear asked if she could see the threat. She already could. Two figures on a rooftop, an RPG being raised, the future narrowing into seconds. "Can you take the shot?" the commander asked. There it was, the question that always came before the doubt. The same doubt she'd heard in other voices in other rooms long before Afghanistan. You're not a sniper. You're not one of us. You don't belong behind that rifle. Elena exhaled slowly. The doubt didn't leave. It never did, but it didn't control her either. "I have the shot," she said. She didn't think about proving anything. She thought about the building below, the people inside who had no idea how close death was. She thought about the promise she'd made in the dust years ago. Then she let the space between heartbeats open. When the rifle spoke, it didn't sound loud to her. It sounded final. 3 seconds later, the rooftop vanished in fire. No one cheered. No one spoke at first. Even over the radio, silence fell, the kind that follows something impossible. Elena was already chambering another round, already scanning, already moving on. Relief was something she allowed herself later when it was safe. Pride came even later than that. By the time the SEAL commander finally spoke again, his voice had changed. That wasn't the first time. Before the rifle, before the valley, before the silence, Elena had stood in another room where men decided what she could and couldn't be. She remembered the way the commander had barely looked up when she entered, the way his words had landed like facts instead of opinions. "You're not a sniper," he'd said. "You took a course. That doesn't make you one." She hadn't argued. She learned early that words rarely changed minds like his. Results did, and results took time. So she waited, she watched. She carried her rifle and her quiet and stayed invisible while missions unfolded without her input. She cleaned weapons. She wrote reports. She listened to conversations stop when she entered rooms. Every night she ran the same memory through her mind, the man bleeding out, the shot that never came, the sentence that followed her everywhere. "Should have had a better shot." That sentence became her compass. When the moment finally came, when protocol said observe and instinct said act, she didn't hesitate. A convoy ambush, an RPG lifting, seconds collapsing. She fired because the math was clear, yes, but more than that, because waiting felt like betrayal. Afterward, the commander confronted her. His voice carried authority and something else, confusion. "You could have missed." "No," she said quietly, "I couldn't have." That was when he started watching her differently. Respect didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It crept in through questions asked carefully, through glances exchanged after shots landed where they shouldn't have, through silence when she spoke numbers that felt too precise to be real. On another mission, she eliminated threats from distances the enemy believed were safe. Men dropped before they understood they'd been seen. Each shot carved space for the team to move, to breathe, to survive. And still, when the night settled, Alina sat alone with her rifle and felt the familiar weight in her chest. Success didn't erase doubt, it sharpened it. Because every shot that landed proved she could do this, and every shot meant she'd have to do it again. The mission that changed everything came with fog thick enough to lie, a hostage building, an RPG team setting up far beyond ordinary reach. The commander asked her the question again, but this time his voice carried something fragile. "Can you make this shot?" Alina didn't answer right away. She watched the fog move. She read the air the way some people read faces. She felt the old anxiety rise, the fear of being wrong when wrong meant bodies. She let it pass. "Yes," she said, engaging. She aimed not at the man, but at what he held. Because sometimes survival isn't about what's expected. It's about what's possible. When the explosion came, it ended more than a threat. It ended every unspoken argument that had followed her since she first picked up a rifle with purpose instead of permission. Afterward, they told her it was the finest shot they'd ever seen. She nodded and returned to Overwatch. Praise was noise. Duty was quiet. Later, alone, she held the dog tags she always carried and whispered the words she'd never said out loud before. "I made the shot." Recognition followed her after that, but it never owned her. Medals pinned to uniforms. Titles changed. Rooms grew quieter when she spoke, not because she demanded attention, but because people had learned what happened when they ignored her. She trained others not to shoot like her, but to think like her, to replace guesswork with understanding, to respect distance instead of fearing it. Watching others improve filled a space inside her she hadn't known was empty. Years later, standing on a range far from Afghanistan, Alina watched a young shooter make a perfect hit at a distance that once terrified him. She felt pride, not loud, not sharp, but steady, the kind that doesn't need witnesses. She thought about the man who died because a shot wasn't ready, about the promise made in grief, about how far that promise had traveled. The rifle rested quietly at her side. It no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a language she had learned fluently enough to teach. Sometimes strength doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it waits, calculates, acts. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply lets the bullet do it. Why did the room go quiet the moment she walked in, as if her presence itself disrupted the balance they were used to? Alina felt it every time she stepped into the operations center. Conversations tapered off. Chairs shifted. Someone always cleared their throat, not hostile, not welcoming either, just uncertain, like no one quite knew where to place her. She stood near the back, arms relaxed at her sides, eyes forward, absorbing details without appearing to. The maps on the wall were marked in grease pencil, villages circled, routes traced, threat arcs sketched with quick confidence. The men around the table spoke in short, practiced sentences, the kind that assumed shared history and unspoken trust. She had neither. The commander's voice cut through the briefing, steady and controlled. Target package, infiltration window, exfil routes, standard rhythm. Alina listened closely, already sensing the gaps between what was said and what was assumed. She noticed how often the plan relied on hope masquerading as probability, how much was left to instinct, how rarely anyone acknowledged what happened when instinct failed. She didn't interrupt, she never did. When the briefing ended, teams broke off in clusters, joking quietly, checking gear, slapping shoulders. Alina moved alone to her corner, laying out her equipment with deliberate care. Each motion was calm, familiar. Ritual mattered. It kept the noise away. She could feel eyes on her sometimes, curious ones, skeptical ones. Once in a while, something sharper. She ignored them all. Being ignored was safer. It reminded her of the first months after she decided to change her life. Back when she'd still been a medic, still carrying a rifle no one expected her to truly use. Back when she'd started showing up at ranges before dawn, long after others had gone home, she remembered the looks then too, the polite confusion, the quiet laughter when they thought she couldn't hear. "You training for something special?" someone had asked once. "Yes," she'd said. They hadn't asked what. Those months had been lonely in a way combat never was. There was no adrenaline to drown the doubt, just repetition, calculations scribbled into notebooks, wind flags watched for hours, misses analyzed instead of excused. She learned quickly that talent didn't protect you from being overlooked, only consistency did. And even that took time. On this deployment, time moved strangely. Days blurred together, punctuated by missions that rarely went as planned. Elena stayed on Overwatch more often than not. She watched teams move through compounds, through valleys, through kill zones she could already see forming. Sometimes she spoke up. Sometimes she was told to hold. Holding was harder than shooting. The hardest moments were the near misses. The seconds when a fighter slipped away because the window wasn't quite right. The times she saw danger brewing and had to trust someone else to address it. Each one tightened something inside her chest. Not fear. Responsibility deferred. One night after a mission that ended messier than anyone liked, she sat outside her hooch cleaning her rifle under a dim light. The camp was quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that followed close calls. Boots crunched on gravel behind her. She didn't look up. "You ever sleep?" a voice asked. "Chief Warren," she recognized the cadence. "Sometimes," she replied. He stood nearby, arms crossed, watching her work. Not the rifle, her hands, the way she moved with unhurried precision. After a moment, he spoke again. "You don't miss much, do you?" She paused just briefly. "I miss things," she said. "I just don't ignore them." That earned a short laugh, then silence again. Warren had been one of the first to soften toward her, though he'd never say it out loud. He asked questions sometimes, casual ones, about wind, about holds, about how she seemed to know things before they happened. She answered plainly, never overselling. She learned that confidence didn't need decoration. The real shift came on a mission that wasn't supposed to matter. Low priority, interdiction, the kind of operation commanders use to maintain pressure rather than expect results. Elena was assigned Overwatch again, positioned farther out than usual. The terrain was uneven, the wind unpredictable. She took her time setting up, listening to the valley, letting the environment introduce itself. When contact broke out, it was sudden and ugly. A fighter moved into position faster than expected. Too fast, too exposed. Elena tracked him, heart steady, mind working. She saw the threat not as a person but as a variable that had to be resolved. She fired. The radio crackled almost immediately. "Who took that shot?" Silence followed. Elena didn't respond right away. She confirmed impact, confirmed no secondary movement. Only then did she speak. "Overwatch," she said. When the team regrouped back at base, the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't dramatic, just subtle. A nod where there hadn't been one before. A pause in conversation that invited her in instead of shutting her out. Later that night, the commander found her again. This time, he didn't sound irritated. "You've got instincts," he said. She looked up from her notebook. "I have data." He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to reconcile the two. "You always this certain?" "No," she said, "I'm careful." Careful wasn't weakness. She learned that the hard way. Careful was what kept promises alive. That night, sleep didn't come easily. It never did after validation brushed too close to old wounds. She lay staring at the ceiling, listening to distant generators hum, replaying moments she couldn't let go of. Marcus's face surfaced again, uninvited. The way his hand had twitched when she'd pressed down harder, as if pressure alone could fix what physics had already decided. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes, forcing herself back to the present. She couldn't save him, but she could make sure others didn't die the same way. Morning brought another briefing, another set of eyes measuring her. This time, when the commander asked for Overwatch estimates, he looked directly at her. "How far can you cover from that ridge?" Alina studied the map. She traced lines with her finger, visualizing elevation changes, wind corridors, angles of exposure. "Effectively, 900 meters," she said. "Beyond that, first-round probability drops, but suppression remains viable." No one laughed. Someone whistled softly instead. From then on, questions came more frequently. Not challenges, requests. Quiet, almost respectful. She answered them all, careful not to sound like she was teaching unless asked. She knew pride was fragile in places like this. She wasn't there to shatter it, only to support it. The commander watched all of this with narrowed eyes. Alina could feel his reassessment like pressure building before a storm. She didn't rush it. Trust earned too quickly was rarely stable. Then came the mission that would test all of them. The intel was thin, the terrain hostile, the margin for error non-existent. As they planned, Alina noticed how often the conversation circled around worst-case scenarios without truly addressing them. She cleared her throat softly. "There's a blind corridor here," she said, pointing. "If they move through it, they'll have cover from assault positions." The room went quiet again, not the old silence, a new one. "What's your solution?" the commander asked. "I cover it," she replied, "from here." He hesitated just a second, then nodded. "Do it." On the ridge, alone again, Alina settled into position. The familiar anxiety returned, but this time it was different. Not about being doubted, about being trusted. Trust weighed more. As the mission unfolded, she stayed locked in, adjusting, recalculating, breathing through the moments where hesitation tempted her. When targets appeared, she engaged with restraint, not aggression. One shot when one was enough, two when it was. She watched the team move through spaces she'd helped clear, her chest tightening every time they passed through an area she'd already measured as safe. When it was over, the radio carried something new. Relief. Back at base, the commander didn't say much. He didn't need to. When he passed her, he stopped. "You did good work today," he said. Not exceptional, not impossible, just good. It meant more than she expected. That night, as she cleaned her rifle under the same dim light, Alina allowed herself a moment she rarely did. She closed her eyes and breathed without counting. The doubt was still there. It always would be, but it no longer stood alone. Because sometimes, being seen wasn't about recognition. It was about finally being trusted to act when silence mattered most. What happens when the silence you rely on starts asking things back? The ridge was colder than expected. Not enough to numb her fingers, but enough to remind Alina that comfort was never guaranteed. She adjusted her position slightly, pressing into the earth, feeling the terrain through layers of gear. Below her, the world waited, that uneasy pause before movement, before intention revealed itself. She learned to respect that pause. The radio stayed quiet longer than usual. No updates, no chatter, just the faint hiss of open comms and her own breathing, steady and deliberate. She scanned slowly, methodically, letting the scope drift across rocks, doorways, shadowed alleys. Every shape carried possibility, most of them harmless, some not. Her mind wandered despite her discipline. It always did when things slowed down. She thought about how strange it was that trust, once given, felt heavier than doubt. Doubt pushed you forward, forced you to prove something. Trust asked you not to fail. She didn't know which one scared her more. A flicker of movement caught her eye, not enough to engage, just enough to note. She marked it mentally and moved on. The valley had a way of playing tricks, wind shifting dust, animals darting between cover, light bending perception. Experience taught her patience. Experience also taught her when patience turned dangerous. She waited. Minutes stretched. The team was moving through the outer edge of the village now. She could see them only in pieces, a shoulder here, a helmet there. Fragile shapes in an environment that didn't care about plans. Her jaw tightened. She tracked ahead of them, always ahead, clearing space they didn't even know was contested. That was the role, invisible, preventative, thankless. Her earpiece crackled softly, a voice low and controlled. "Overwatch status." "All clear so far," she replied. "Winds picking up from the west. Minor corrections advised." "Copy." She exhaled slowly. The wind was the real adversary today. Unpredictable, playful, deceptive. She watched how it moved the grass, how it shifted dust in narrow streams. She adjusted her dope again, trusting instinct sharpened by repetition rather than confidence. She wondered, not for the first time, what her life would have been if Marcus hadn't died. If she'd stayed a medic. If she'd never stepped behind a rifle with intent. That path felt distant now, like a version of herself she barely recognized. Softer, maybe, or just untested. A sharp report echoed from the village. Not hers, not friendly. Her pulse spiked, but her hand stayed calm. She traced the sound backward, triangulating, searching for origin. A doorway, second floor, brief muzzle flash, poor concealment, a mistake. She didn't fire. Not yet. She waited for the second confirmation, movement, intent, pattern. It came quickly. The figure leaned out again, scanning, hunting. She fired once. The recoil was familiar, grounding. The figure disappeared. No secondary movement. She held her sight picture longer than necessary, ensuring the threat was neutralized before shifting focus. "Contact down," she said quietly. The radio stayed silent for a beat. Then movement resumed below. She didn't feel relief. Not yet. Relief waited until extraction, until everyone was counted, until she could finally let the weight settle somewhere other than her chest. As the mission continued, Alina noticed something else. The way the team moved now felt different, more fluid, less tentative, as if the space she created allowed them to trust their own momentum. She watched them clear rooms she'd already measured as safe, their confidence borrowing from hers without them realizing it. It felt strange, being a foundation rather than an afterthought. The extraction went smoothly, too smoothly. Alina stayed alert even as the team regrouped, her eyes scanning for last-minute surprises. She'd seen too many missions unravel at the end, when focus slipped, when exhaustion whispered that it was over before it truly was. Only when the birds lifted off did she allow herself to ease. Back at base, the energy was subdued but lighter. Gear was stowed, weapons cleared. Someone cracked a joke that landed instead of falling flat. Alina moved through it all quietly, nodding when spoken to, disappearing when not. She was halfway through cleaning her rifle when she felt it, that familiar heaviness creeping back in. The adrenaline had faded. The silence returned, and with it the questions. She set the rifle down carefully and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The image of the man in the doorway replayed in her mind. The way he'd leaned out, confident, unaware. She wondered who he'd been 5 minutes earlier, whether he'd believed in something, whether anyone would miss him. These thoughts didn't make her hesitate. They never had, but they lingered, proof that she hadn't numbed herself completely. A knock on the doorframe broke her focus. The commander stood there, posture relaxed but eyes sharp. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. She nodded. He stepped inside, hands clasped loosely behind his back. He didn't speak right away. He looked around instead, the sparse room, the neatly arranged gear, the rifle laid out with reverence rather than obsession. "You ever think about stopping?" he asked suddenly. Alina blinked. "Stopping what?" "This," he said, gesturing vaguely. "The long shots, the responsibility, all of it." She considered the question honestly. "Sometimes," she said, "but I think about what happens if I do more." He nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something he'd already suspected. "I was wrong about you," he said. The words landed heavier than praise ever could. She didn't respond immediately, not because she didn't appreciate it, but because she'd learned not to rush moments that mattered. Most people are, she said finally, not unkindly. He smiled just barely, then his expression turned serious again. There's talk of moving you into a more permanent Overwatch role, he said. Training input, mission planning, your call if you want it. The offer stirred something inside her. Pride, yes, but also fear. Being indispensable meant being relied upon, and reliance meant consequences when things went wrong. I'll think about it, she said. That night sleep came in fragments. She dreamed of winds she couldn't read, of targets that blurred when she needed them sharp, of Marcus standing just out of focus, watching her with an expression she couldn't interpret. She woke before dawn, heart racing, hands steady. At the range later that day, she worked through drills methodically. Distance, angle, wind, each shot grounded her. Each impact reminded her why she stayed, not for validation, not for acceptance. For precision, for prevention. A younger operator watched her from a few lanes over, clearly trying not to stare. Eventually, he approached, hesitant. "How do you always know when to take the shot?" he asked. Alina paused, considering how to answer without mythologizing herself. "I don't always know," she said. "I just know when not to." He nodded, absorbing that quietly. As she packed up her gear, Alina felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not doubt, not anxiety. Responsibility. The kind that doesn't announce itself loudly. The kind that grows in silence, waiting for the next moment when everything depends on calm judgment. And she knew, with unsettling clarity, that the hardest shots weren't the longest ones. They were the ones that asked you to carry what came after. What do you do when the people who trust you most never see the weight you carry for them? The mission briefing started before sunrise, the kind that seeped into bones and made coffee feel like a ritual rather than a comfort. Alina stood near the edge of the room, hands loosely folded, eyes on the map projected against the wall. New valley, new objective, same risks dressed in different terrain. She listened as routes were debated, contingencies layered over contingencies. Her name came up more often now, not questioned, consulted. It still felt strange. She remembered when her silence had been interpreted as uncertainty. Now it was treated like calculation. The difference wasn't lost on her. "There's a ridge here," the commander said, tapping the screen. "Overwatch position, high exposure but good sightlines." Alina leaned forward slightly. "Wind tunnels through that gap in the afternoon," she said. "Shots will drift right past 700, morning windows cleaner." The commander nodded without hesitation. "We move earlier." Just like that. She felt a subtle tightening in her chest. Not pride, something closer to fear, because decisions like that echoed outward. Because if the plan failed, the silence would point back to her. On the ridge hours later, Alina settled into position with practiced ease. The sun was still low, painting the valley in muted gold. She adjusted her bipod, pressed her cheek into the stock, and let the world narrow. Her breathing slowed. Her thoughts followed. Below her, the team advanced carefully. She watched their spacing, their angles, the way their bodies communicated trust without words. She knew each of them now, how they moved when confident, when tense, when tired. That familiarity made the stakes sharper. A faint rustle of movement caught her attention. Not hostile, not yet. She tracked it anyway, heart steady, eyes unblinking. The figure emerged from behind a low wall unarmed. A local, too close to the path, too curious. She didn't fire, she didn't even raise her finger. She spoke instead. "Civilian near Route Bravo," she said softly. "Advise reroute or pause." The team adjusted, no questions asked. Moments like that didn't make reports. They didn't earn acknowledgement, but they mattered more to her than any confirmed kill. They were proof that restraint was still part of the equation. As the mission unfolded, the tension built in quiet layers. A door that took too long to open, a shadow that moved when it shouldn't have. Alina tracked every detail, her mind constantly running probabilities, adjusting expectations. She felt the familiar fatigue creeping in, not physical, but emotional. The exhaustion of always being ahead, of seeing outcomes before others felt them. Then it happened. A flash of metal, a movement too deliberate to ignore, a figure breaking from cover, lifting something heavy. RPG. Time compressed. Alina's world narrowed to angles and wind, and the knowledge that hesitation here meant funerals later. She didn't think about the commander, or the trust placed in her, or the quiet weight of being the one everyone relied on. She fired. The shot felt clean, right, the kind that left no room for doubt. The explosion was contained, sharp, decisive. The threat ended before it could fully exist. "Threat neutralized," she said, voice even. The radio crackled with acknowledgments, but she barely heard them. Her focus was already shifting, scanning for secondary threats, for the ripple effects of violence. Her heart rate climbed, then settled. She stayed in position long after the team moved past the danger zone, ensuring the silence held. Only when extraction was called did she allow herself to ease back, muscles finally unclenching. Back at base, the mood was subdued but relieved. Another mission completed. Another set of risks navigated. Alina moved through debrief quietly, answering questions when asked, offering insights without embellishment. She could feel the unspoken gratitude in the room, but it didn't reach her the way it might have once. Later, alone again, she sat on the edge of her bunk, hands resting on her knees. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the familiar hollowness. She stared at the floor, replaying the moment when the RPG had lifted, the certainty she'd felt, the finality of the shot. She wondered how many more times she could carry that. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Chief Warren stepped in, his expression unreadable. "Commander wants you," he said. In the command tent, the air felt heavier. The commander stood by the table, arms crossed, eyes tired. "Sit," he said. Alina did. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said, preempting him. He raised an eyebrow, and "I'll take the expanded role," she said, "but I want conditions." He gestured for her to continue. "I stay operational," she said. "I don't become a symbol or a story. And when I say no, when I say a shot shouldn't be taken, that carries the same weight as when I say yes." The commander studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Agreed." The decision settled between them like a contract written in silence. That night, Alina walked the perimeter of the base, letting the cool air clear her head. The stars were bright, indifferent. She thought about the path that had brought her here, the loss that had driven her, the doubts that had shaped her, the trust that now surrounded her like armor she wasn't sure she deserved. She stopped near the edge of the wire and looked out into the darkness. Somewhere beyond it, lives continued without knowledge of the choices made in places like this, of the shots taken, of the shots deliberately withheld. She felt a quiet pride then, not in the rifle, not in the role, but in the discipline it took to hold both power and restraint without letting either define her completely. The next weeks passed in a blur of missions and planning sessions. Alina found herself mentoring younger operators, teaching them not just how to shoot, but how to wait, how to listen to the environment, how to accept uncertainty without letting it paralyze them. One evening, the young operator from the range approached her again. "Do you ever get used to it?" he asked. "The responsibility." She shook her head. "If you do, it's time to stop." He nodded, thoughtful. That night, alone once more, Alina wrote in her notebook not numbers, not wine charts, but names. Names of places, names of people, a quiet record of moments that mattered. She closed it carefully as if sealing a promise. Because she knew now that strength wasn't just about making impossible shots. It was about carrying the invisible weight of every decision and still choosing to act with care when silence asked you to. What happens when the one thing holding you together starts to crack, quietly, without warning? Alina noticed it on a morning that should have felt ordinary. The sky was clear, the air still, her hand steady as she laid out her rifle, but something inside her lagged like a delayed echo. She dismissed it at first. Fatigue did that. So did repetition. You learn not to dramatize small fractures when the job required steadiness. Still, the feeling stayed. The mission was supposed to be routine overwatch for a joint patrol, low threat, predictable movement. Alina took her position early, settling into the rhythm she'd trusted for years. She scanned, she listened, she breathed. Everything looked right, too right. She adjusted her scope slightly, then paused. Her heart skipped not from fear but from recognition. The environment hadn't changed, she had. Her thoughts drifted more easily now, slipping past discipline like water through a crack. She brought herself back, firm but gentle. Focus wasn't forced, it was maintained. Below her, the patrol moved in staggered formation. Alina tracked them, marking potential threats before they existed. She did her job. She always did. But the weight felt heavier today, pressing against her ribs in a way she couldn't ignore. She thought of Marcus again, more often lately. Not the blood or the panic, but his laugh. The way he joked during downtime, as if humor could keep the world at arm's length. She hadn't thought about that version of him in years. The radio crackled. Overwatch confirmed clear on the ridgeline. Alina scanned once more. Everything aligned. She hesitated just long enough to feel it, doubt, not in her ability but in her endurance. Clear, she said. The word felt heavier than it should have. The mission ended without incident. Clean, efficient, forgettable to everyone but her. Back at base, Alina moved through her routines with mechanical precision. She cleaned her rifle, logged notes, reviewed footage, everything correct, everything intact. Except her. That night sleep wouldn't come. When it finally did, it dragged her somewhere she hadn't visited in a long time. She stood again in the dust, hands slick with blood, shouting for help that didn't arrive in time. This time, though, Marcus looked at her differently. Not accusing, just tired. She woke with her heart racing, breath shallow, the room unfamiliar for a split second. She sat up slowly, grounding herself, counting breaths, counting sounds, the hum of generators, distant footsteps, reality returning piece by piece. She stayed awake until morning. Over the next few days, Alina caught herself hesitating in small ways. Not on shots, never on shots, but in the spaces between. Decision-making took more effort. Emotional distance felt thinner. She found herself watching the team longer after missions, memorizing faces as if afraid one might disappear. Chief Warren noticed. "You good?" he asked one evening, leaning against a crate beside her. "I'm fine," she replied automatically. He didn't push. He just nodded and stayed there a moment longer than necessary. The breaking point came quietly. Another mission, another ridge. The wind was erratic but manageable. Alina tracked a suspected lookout moving along a wall, armed, dangerous. The team was approaching from below. She had the shot. She always did. But her finger didn't move. For a fraction of a second, barely measurable, she hesitated. In that space, something inside her screamed not uncertainty but exhaustion. The weight of every previous decision pressed forward all at once. The knowledge that once she pulled the trigger, there was no taking it back, no explaining it, no undoing. Then training took over. She fired. The threat went down. The team advanced safely. No one noticed the hesitation, no one but her. Her hands trembled after. Back at base, Alina sat alone, staring at her rifle like it belonged to someone else. The thought came unbidden, sharp and unwelcome. What if next time, the hesitation lasts longer? She stood abruptly, packing the small space, trying to outrun the thought, but it followed her, calm and persistent. She'd always believed that doubt was manageable as long as she acknowledged it. This felt different. This felt like erosion. That evening, she requested a meeting. The commander listened in silence as she spoke. She didn't dramatize. She didn't confess weakness. She stated facts. "I hesitated," she said, "not because I couldn't make the shot, because I'm carrying too much of the aftermath." The commander didn't interrupt. When she finished, he leaned back slightly, eyes thoughtful. "You're saying you're a liability." "No," she said. "I'm saying I'm human, and I don't want that to surprise me in the wrong moment." Silence stretched between them, then he nodded. "Stand down from Overwatch for the next rotation," he said. "Advisory role only." The words stung more than she expected. She nodded anyway, understood. Walking out of the tent, Alina felt hollow, not relieved, not ashamed, just untethered. The rifle had been her anchor. Without it, she wasn't sure where to place her hands. The next mission she watched from a screen instead of a ridge. She gave guidance, adjustments, warnings. The team moved well, safely. They didn't need her trigger finger. That realization hurt in a way she hadn't prepared for. Days passed, then weeks. Alina filled her time training others, reviewing footage, refining protocols. She was useful, valuable, still trusted, but something essential was missing. The quiet communion between her and the environment, the direct responsibility. One evening she found herself at the range alone. She hadn't planned to be there. Her feet had carried her without conscious thought. She set up slowly, deliberately, treating each motion as a check-in rather than a task. The first shot went wide. She froze, surprised. Then she adjusted, breathed, fired again. Better. She didn't push, she didn't force precision. She let herself be imperfect. It felt strange, liberating, terrifying. As the sun dipped low, she packed up and sat on the bench, watching the horizon darken. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider a future that didn't revolve entirely around the rifle. Not an ending. A recalibration. She understood now that strength wasn't about never cracking. It was about recognizing the fracture before it became a break, about stepping back before you were pushed. Later that night, she wrote in her notebook again. Not names this time, reflections, questions she didn't yet have answers to. She closed it gently. Because resilience, she was learning, wasn't silence without feeling. It was knowing when to pause, so that when the moment came again, you could act without regret. What remains of you when the silence finally asks you to choose who you are without it? The call came just before dawn, when the world still felt unfinished. Alina answered it without checking the number. Some habits never left. "We need you," the commander said. No urgency in his voice, something heavier. "Not the rifle, you." She sat up slowly, letting the words settle. Outside, the base was quiet, wrapped in that brief moment between night and obligation. She didn't ask for details yet. She already understood the shape of the request. "I'm listening," she said. The mission was unfolding faster than anyone liked. A high-value extraction gone unstable, narrow window, compromised routes. The terrain was unforgiving, the kind that punished arrogance and rewarded patience. The Overwatch assigned was capable but inexperienced, technically sound, emotionally untested. "They trust you," the commander said. "They listen to you." Alina closed her eyes briefly. She felt the old pull, sharp and familiar, not toward the rifle, but toward responsibility. "I'll advise," she said, remotely. "That's all we're asking." In the operations center, screens glowed with live feeds and digital maps. Voices overlapped in controlled tension. Alina took her seat quietly, slipping into focus without ceremony. She listened before she spoke. Always. The young Overwatch operator's voice came through first, tight, trying to sound steadier than he felt. "Wind's inconsistent," he said. I'm compensating, but you're chasing it, Alina said gently. Stop correcting for what you think it'll do. Read what it's doing now. There was a pause, then a breath. Copy. She watched his feed stabilize. His movements slowed. His breathing evened out. She remembered herself at that stage, how badly she'd wanted certainty, how long it had taken her to accept that certainty was earned moment by moment. On the screen, the extraction team edged toward the objective. Every movement felt amplified. Alina tracked not just positions but psychology, the subtle signs of pressure, the way shoulders tensed, the way spacing drifted when confidence wavered. A potential threat appeared on the edge of one feed, not armed, not yet. Hold, Alina said, don't rush it. The operator hesitated, she could hear it. You have time, she added. Let the picture finish forming. Seconds passed. The figure moved on. The danger evaporated without consequence. Well done, Alina said softly. The words mattered more than she'd ever realized. Then everything accelerated. Movement on a rooftop, heat signatures spiking, a secondary threat assembling faster than anticipated. The young operator's breathing quickened. Alina leaned forward, heart steady, mind clear. Talk me through it, she said. 2 tangos, he replied. Range long, wind. Forget the wind for a second, she said. What's the priority? Protect the team. Then everything else is noise. She watched his reticle settle, watched him commit. The shot rang out through the speakers, clean, controlled. A second followed, the rooftop went still. The room exhaled. The extraction succeeded. No casualties, no last-minute chaos. When the feeds cut, applause broke out quietly, not celebratory, relieved. Alina sat back, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. She felt something unexpected bloom in her chest, not pride in the outcome, but peace in the process. She hadn't needed to pull the trigger to make a difference. Later outside, the sky had softened into early morning light. Alina walked alone along the perimeter, boots crunching softly against gravel. She thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived here, the one who believed value was measured in distance and precision, in impact. She understood now how incomplete that belief had been. The commander joined her without announcement, matching her pace. You saved them today, he said. She shook her head. They saved themselves. He smiled. You gave them the space to do it. They walked in silence for a while. Then he spoke again. You ever think about what comes next? Alina considered the question as the sun crept higher, illuminating the wire, the watchtowers, the scars in the landscape. Yes, she said, and for the first time it doesn't scare me. Her transition was gradual, intentional. She stayed close to operations but no longer defined herself by proximity to the trigger. She taught. She listened. She became the calm voice in other people's chaos. Occasionally she returned to the range, not to test herself, to remember. Each shot was deliberate, unhurried, free of expectation. She smiled more then, quietly, privately. Months later, she received a message from the young operator. Made my longest shot today, it read. Didn't rush it, heard your voice in my head. Alina closed her eyes, emotion tightening her throat. She typed back a simple reply. Then you did it right. On her last evening before rotating home, she stood beneath the open sky, stars scattered with careless beauty. She thought of Marcus, of the promise she'd made, of how that promise had changed shape over time. She hadn't broken it. She expanded it. Because sometimes, strength isn't about being the one who acts. Sometimes, it's about knowing when your silence has taught others how to. And in the end, dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply acts, or steps aside, with purpose.